Set 9 has finally dropped onto the live servers, and it's about damn time that we got our first meta-analysis of the set. If this is your first meta-analysis that you're watching of mine, you would know that this is not exactly just a comps list, but we also talk a little bit about other things that are going on with the meta, best components darts, best lines to start off with, etc, etc. This is not exactly a tier list, right? Also, if you've been watching my content for a while, you would also know that this meta-analysis is slightly overdue. I usually get these out within 3 to 5 days of the patch hitting the live servers because, we need a little bit of time before the patch has really, settled itself into the meta. We know what's going on, right? Also, it is the first week of the set. A lot of stats are coming out. A lot of optimizations are still being made. So this is why this meta-analysis is slightly later than normally it would be. Now, let's talk a little bit about how XP changes have changed how we approach set 9 compared to set 8, specifically with leveling and how to look for our 4-cost carries. It is a 4-cost meta right now, although there are a lot of decent reroll comps that are out there, but personally speaking, and I think for the most part, for a lot of players, we kind of stray away from reroll because flexing right now in the current set just feels a little bit better, just a little bit better. It's not a lot, but in my opinion, it feels a little better to flex rather than play for reroll. Now, how has the XP changes changed the way we approach set 9? Well, let's talk about what the XP changes exactly are, right? The XP changes, for those of you who don't know, they have made it a little more expensive to go from 5 to 6, 6 to 7, 7 to 8, and 8 to 9. The increments are not that large, but they're large enough that you will feel it, right? 10 gold is a lot more gold to be pushing into a level. Do that 4 times, it gets pricey, right? So how does this affect the way that we approach the game, especially if it is a 4-cost meta and we are trying to play around 4-cost carries? We're going to be stuck on level 7 a lot of the times, right? And how does this affect the way that we play, right? Well, in previous sets, in set 8, you would know that the standard method, or rather the standard interval to try to level to 8 was usually around 4-2 if you were fast, 4-5 was really standard, 5-1 was kind of late. Now these intervals have been pushed back a little bit. So now we're seeing a lot more players are playing around level 8 at 5-1, 5-5, and sometimes, well, it's usually never later than 5-5. 5-5 is pretty late, but usually by around stage 5 is when you can go, okay, I'm probably going to level to 8 at a certain point. When do we exactly do that now? That is different because of the XP changes. Now, why is it different? How does it affect it so drastically in terms of gameplay? Well, because there are going to be games where people are low rolling, right? Let's say you are one of the unfortunate ones who have to try to force a lose streak because you're not playing Piltover. If you're playing Piltover, it's different. But if you're lose streaking early game, right? And you are slowly losing your HP, you're dwindling down, it's 4-1s coming up, and you just got to level 7, you're going to have to do a roll down. You're going to have to roll down and try to stabilize and try to push up your tempo again by trying to find carries with all the economy that you've garnered up throughout the early and most of mid game, right? So this means that there are going to be players in your lobby who are going to be rolling pretty heavily on level 7 at 4-1 to try to find the 4-cost carries that they need in order to stabilize first. They do have first dibs, worse odds compared to those who are trying to fast 8, but fast 8 is a very high roll position to be in. Most of the time you cannot fast 8 because the competition to try to get these 4 costs is too high. The jump in terms of percentages, in terms of trying to get a 4 cost versus on level 7 versus level 8 is 15% versus 25%. 25% at level 8 is much, much better, but 15% is nothing to sleep on. 15% is still strong enough that you will still probably find your 4 costs at least 1 star if you're lucky, 2 star at level 7. Now, this also means that if you are going to try to fast 8, you really need to be scouting the lobby to make sure that your 4 cost is at least not that contested, or if it is, have options to pivot out because that might be something that you might need to do, right? That is the difference when it comes to set 8 to set 9 with the XP changes. Now, I also want to point out, though, that this is also a really strong test of your fundamentals, specifically fundamentals. Ooh, there's no T's in there. Fundamentals, right? And specifically, it's about your rolling efficiency. Now, what is rolling efficiency? I've thrown this term around a couple times throughout the channel, but I was planning on doing a video about efficiency and economic efficiency in general, but it's a very complex topic, and I don't know if I have the time exactly to make a full-on guide on it, but I'll give you the brief rundown. Econ efficiency, or rather rolling efficiency, is understanding how much to balance your rolls. Now, what do I mean by that? For example, if you're staying, this is the most obvious example. If you have 4 pairs on your bench and you have, let's say 40 gold, it's probably a good idea to roll, because it's so efficient for you to roll here to find at least some level of an upgrade that will help spike the power of your board. Now, for example, let's say on those 4 pairs, you roll, let's say 5 gold. Not 5, sorry, that's an odd number, 6 gold. You roll 6 gold, you're very likely to probably find one of those pairs, assuming that the odds are all right? And that one upgrade can save you a decent amount of HP. Now, what about 3 pairs though? How do you start rolling for then? What about 2 pairs, right? And being able to assess this and balance the pros and cons is what's going to be really tested in this current patch. Maybe if they change the XP, I doubt it though. I think the XP changes were in fact necessary, and as much as I hated them initially, I think they're actually better for the game overall. So again, make sure that you are testing your knowledge and your fundamentals and trying to really balance the pros and cons. Now, again, it's a very complex thing to balance, right? There's no shortcut for this, and you really have to think critically about your position, but that's what TFT is all about. And I really suggest that if you are struggling with this sort of thing, just ask yourself, what am I rolling for? And more often than not, you might be surprised with the answer, where you might find yourself going like, hey, like, if I roll here, like, how much gold do I have to roll for to just try to find this like 2-star upgrade? It's probably not worth it. So maybe I'll just try to level instead, and that level can spike my board harder than if I were to try to roll for this specific upgrade. But now that we've talked about the XP changes, let's talk a little bit about the current meta and current boards that we can play around. Now, I'm not going to go over too in depth about the sort of boards that everybody is aware of. You'll know what I mean as soon as, you look at the screens, put over Zeri, right? We're not going to go too deep into these, but I do want to point out that a lot of people are feeling frustrated because they think it's like a 80 heavy meta. Like, it's like Zeri Aphelios every single game. It's Zeke's Herald slams all the time. Pandora's bench forcing, yada, yada, yada. Listen, man. I'm going to be honest with you. I think if you think it's a really strong 80 meta, I think you're tripping a little bit. I'm going to be fucking on. I'm going to be honest. There's a lot of very valuable and very strong AP lines that are available within the current meta. And I'm going to be honest with you. I don't think it's actually as bad as people make it out to be. I would actually argue some things like the Zeri comp are slightly overtuned. But there's a lot of really strong alternative lines you can play that can counter the Zeri board. And actually, if you're playing into a really strong Piltover board, I'll show you at the very end a board that I think completely counters it. So let's go quickly over the sort of boards that everybody knows, and then we'll go into the little more niche ones that we should probably be touching a little more in depth on, because there are some nuances that you have to consider that aren't there, or rather present, if you're just there at the board. Okay, so good, let's talk about it. So first off, Zeri Reroll, not Zeri Reroll, sorry, Piltover, 4 Gunners. We all know this board. 4's on, Zeri is great, cool, good stuff. Ginsu's on Zeri, Last Whisper on Zeri, absolutely necessary, unless you find a very early Heimerdinger where you can get Shrink Module. Zeri needs Shred, and this is the only way to get it, either through Heimerdinger or through Last Whisper. Almost always prioritize that Last Whisper. Also, 3 item Zeri is more important than a 3 Zekes. At a certain point, you can have too many Zekes, right? If you are tossed between a situation where you want either a 3rd Zekes or a 3rd item on Zeri, get that 3rd item on Zeri. Don't forget your fundamentals. This will always be stronger than having a triple Zekes. Okay? Good. Now that we talked about that, though, let's talk a little bit more about other comps as well. So next one here, the 6 Juggernaut one. Again, we all know this. It's reroll Garen. You 3-star the Garen. You go for yada, yada, yada. We all know. We know. Okay? I will say this, though. I just dropped my phone. I will say this, though. I don't think this comp is good unless you have a Juggernaut Spat. It's a little unreliable, especially because if you don't hit that Garen 3, it's difficult to sort of still secure a top 4. If you are low rolling on the Garens, you also don't really have any better alternatives to look for, because it's really just rolling for Darius 3. And that's why I'm not the biggest fan of this comp. I used to be a bigger believer in it, but now I'm a little less. 2-star Garen is a little too strong of a unit in my opinion, though. I think this slightly needs a nerf, but I think 3-star Garen is exactly where it needs to be. It's actually fine. In terms of how to, what to do if you're not finding the Garens, I think you don't prioritize Demacia, and I actually think you play around this flex version of Kai'Sa with Juggernauts, this was sort of prevalent during the PBE, but this is still a very, very strong way to secure a top 4. Kai'Sa by herself doesn't do enough damage to really close out a fight, but with Archangels, she can scale enough with 2 Challenger Kai'Sa and like 3 items with like GS and maybe a Gunblade even. Keep your front line alive so that you can try to hit into OT, where Kai'Sa will do a lot more damage and wipe out the boards better. These Juggernaut boards, I will say though, if you are playing in Yumi's Zoom Zone, which is the portal where you are, I believe the fights are 10 seconds shorter, this is definitely one of the stronger comps in that portal specifically. But Moving on to the next one here too, we have the Aphelios comp as well. Everybody knows Aphelios. It's 4 Deadeye at the moment. In the PvE, 2 Deadeye was sort of the wave where you didn't actually end up playing Urgot at all, or the Akshan. You would just drop these two and flex more frontline units. Unfortunately, Aphelios at the moment is not strong enough to carry with just 2 Deadeye, so you definitely need 4. Plus, Urgot 2, really strong unit. You definitely want to be itemizing him second after you itemize your Aphelios. And I will say this though, surprisingly enough, if you do look into the stats, Ginsu IE is actually an insane itemization for Aphelios. If you don't believe me, we can look at this live right now. I'm going to put this in Diamond Plus because Diamond Plus at the moment, I believe it's roughly around the top 2,000 players right now, the player base. Maybe it's more, maybe it's less. But currently, I'm sitting at what? I'm D2. I'm rank 428 on the ladder right now. Still very early in the set, so diamond stats at the moment are still the way to go. Where is my tab? Here we go. So with Aphelios, again, this is all available to you. Tactics.tools, you can look into the stats, and I highly recommend just taking a day to just explore the stats a little bit. Not even a day, just like 20-30 minutes, just explore the stats, see what you can find, right? And as we can see here with Aphelios, obviously his best itemizations are with Sniper Focus and Ginsu's, but if we scroll down a little bit, it's actually, oh, what do you know? Ginsu Deathblade is actually better than Ginsu IE. But as you can see, double Ginsu's, Aphelios really loves getting that attack speed. And as we can see here, even the Ionia Spat here, really nice as well, because that gives bonus attack speed. Good stuff. But again, we all know this board. Let's keep going. Finally, the Ekko Reroll board. This is, again, a board that we all know of. This is a board that has sort of recently emerged, but I don't recommend it. Now, why do I not recommend it? It's because of the Zeri meta. Why does that matter? Why does this Zeri board affect this board? Do you see it yet? There are 2 units from the Zeri board that are highly contested on this board. It is Ekko and Urgot, and one of these units you are trying to 3-star, and this Ekko is not even a priority. So here's the problem. You are going to have a very difficult time trying to hit this Ekko 3. And even though, yes, Ekko 3 is a beast and will fucking wipe out a lot of boards, especially in the backline meta that we have today, where it's a very front to back meta, right? This is going to not happen most of the time. Most players who've run this comp might have realized that if you try to run an Ekko 3, you just can't find the Ekko 3. It's hard to find unless there's not a lot of Zeri players in the lobby. If there are not, maybe you can play into it, but it's difficult to tempo into, and you definitely cannot lose streak in the early game because Ekko 2 Cat 2 doesn't stabilize you very hard. It stabilizes you okay. Stage 5, you're going to lose a lot of HP. So definitely keep that in mind. But now let's start going over the boards that are a little more nuanced. So they actually go from less nuanced to more nuanced, or like more known, lesser known. Okay, we're gonna talk about Reroll Tristana, and I'm gonna be pretty quick with this one too. We all know Reroll Tristana, but there's a couple nuances I do want to talk about. Specifically, this board is not as strong as you think it is. I don't care who the fuck you are, this board is not that strong. It's not strong for a couple of reasons. One, the cap is hard to hit. The cap is hard to hit because you need Honor Roll or Golden Ticket at 2-1. If you don't have either of these options available to you, this comp is significantly weaker and is significantly harder to force. If you are lower elo though, and you are uncontested, I will say that this comp is actually very viable for you because it's one of those comps that it gets punished at higher elos because people are playing real boards during stage 2. Real boards, as in boards that are strong, will deal a lot of damage. You will get 4-0'd, 5-0'd, hard punished for playing boards like these, especially during stage 3. So if you're lower elo though, that isn't much of a problem, and you can actually try and force this line even without getting on a roll or golden ticket. Higher elo you go though, once you start hitting diamond, once you start hitting masters and above, you really cannot play this board unless you have honor roll or golden ticket. Now I will say this though, the reason why this board is a bit more nuanced is because the way that you approach this board, 2 things. One, if you're playing honor roll, you have to roll on 2-2. You have to roll on 2-2. If you have golden ticket, maybe not. But on a roll, you definitely roll on 2-2. You roll on 2-2, and the tech is that every time you get a 1-star upgrade that you don't care about, whether it is like a Nirelia or a Samira or whatever, you upgrade it, sell the unit, and then buy all the 1 costs, refresh your shop, right? And you keep that going. Ideally, on 2-2, you should actually have most of your Tristanas, most of your other 1-star carries, whether it's the Viego, the Poppy, or the Maokai. Now, you might have noticed I also mentioned Viego. Viego is important because if you miss on the Poppy or the Maokai, you have Viego as an option as this sort of secondary tank. Not really, though. He's just a strong unit that you get to play during Stage 3 that will help you stabilize. The ideal tempo for this comp, though, I will also mention, is that by 3-1, you have all your 3 stars. It's really hard to play this comp without all your 3 stars by 2-1, or at the very least 2 out of 3 of them, right? And you're sort of rolling to get that last one. And you might also find a lot of pro players, they're actually donkey rolling on stage 3 trying to find that last upgrade, because as soon as they find it, they can start tempoing, and it's just a lot better to play from. And with honor roll, golden ticket, this is actually a viable strat. You can also try to slow roll if you heavily miss on 3-1, but just know that if you heavily miss on 3-1, it's way harder. It is way harder to win out. Also, I will mention this as well. You need 4 gunner. You need 4 gunner. The stats really hate 2 gunner. It's really, really bad. So actually, if you hit that Viego 3, and you don't hit the Poppy 3, you'd actually play Viego 3 over this Poppy 3. And then that's just your board. You actually wouldn't have Bastion in, which would kind of suck. But that's also another reason why I don't really like this board. There's a lot of conditions that need to go right. 4 gunner also, you might notice, needs a Zeri, and you're hitting level 7 a lot later than everybody else because you've been rolling trying to hit your 3 stars, right? And just for some proof here, as we can see, Tristana on a roll, typically it's 3 Yordle. 5 Yordle is like the insane cap, but it's really rare because you almost always end up itemizing the Maokai. It's your main tank. Poppy can be, but the problem is that the items get a bit dicey, because if you end up getting a lot of tank items, suddenly your Tristana's not the 4 cost, it's the Poppy instead, and that becomes problematic, so you end up itemizing Maokai, right? The true peak is Poppy 4, Tristana 4, but that's incredibly unrealistic. So realistically, you're almost playing 3 Yordle all the time with on roll, and as you can see here, averages of 3.9 is a very decent play rate, right? Again, this is, I believe, Diamond Plus, but I will also mention, though, that, again, like we said before, if you end with 2 Gunner, 5.0. Don't care if you have honor roll, 3 Yordle, you get everything online, it's a 5.0. We game split by star level, we see that even if you have the Maokai 3, the Poppy 3, Tristana 3, Viego 3, 4.8, 4.9, 4.9, 4.9, you need 4 Gunner. So this comp heavily relies on you hitting that 4 Gunner and then being able to play around it. But again, a lot of nuance in this one. I don't recommend it. Every time I play this comp, it's kind of like an 8th. There's so many conditions, and I don't recommend it. So if you are trying to climb, maybe you want to have fun, play it. But if you don't want to, if you're trying to climb, like seriously, don't. I would actually stay away from this comp 99% of the time. Anyways, let's go on to the next one. So Ionia Spat is something, this is a little less nuanced, but everybody is aware of the early game with this board, because 3 Ionia is a very, very strong early game board. Not the strongest. I would actually argue it's the second strongest. We'll talk about the strongest early game board in my opinion later on, but for now, this is easily one of the strongest early game boards that we can play. Now, I'm talking about early game, but I'm showing you the end game board, but this is the end game board. Ideally, you have the Ionia Spat, and you play around 6 Ionia for Challenger at level 7. You might also notice that a lot of these boards, we are looking at them from a level 7 perspective, because level 7 is, again, ideal. So even if you're low rolling or you're loose streaking early game, you can still send it at level 7 to try to find these units and try to stabilize your board. Obviously, you're not going to donkey roll at 7, play but what you hit. We talked about this earlier. I'm not going to talk about this anymore. We want to play around the Yasuo 2, Kai'Sa 2. Now, I will say this, though. You can also play the Aphelios version of this board, where you play Ionia Aphelios instead, and maybe you drop Warwick, I don't know. You can maybe drop Warwick, and you drop the Kai'Sa here for the Aphelios instead, and then you play something along the lines of something like this. And this board is surprisingly still very, very strong. I will say, though, like, again, I don't play this variation because I actually like the 4 Challenger version better. I think it's more consistent than Ionia Aphelios, but if you have the conditions for the Ionia Aphelios board, totally fine to play into this as well. As you can tell, I don't really play this board. I guess you just drop set here, and it's probably something along the lines of this, but still really, really strong board to play. You dual carry Yasuo with the Aphelios, and you already get enough attack speed through here. I believe we already saw the gigabits for this earlier, but I believe it was like Last Whisper +1. Really, really strong board to play. I will say, though, again, like I said, the early game, it's very straightforward, very, very strong. And if you see somebody with like a Jhin 2, Aurelia 2, and they have the Ionia bonus teched in, it's like you're probably not winning against them unless you also have something similar. This is easily, again, if you see any Jhins in the early game, you should be holding them. This is like top 2 early game boards. This is probably maybe one of the, if not one of the strongest level 5 boards that you can play. Really, really insane. Aurelia, the reason why it's so strong is because of the Ionia bonus. Jhin gets an extra 30 AD with his Ionia bonus, as you can see here in the description, but also Aurelia gets a bonus 40 armor and MR if she gets the Ionia bonus going. People have realized this Ionia bonus is so insane early game that this is just the earliest and strongest game to play, or strongest comp to play. I will say this though, you also have a little bit of hidden tech here with the healing orbs. I actually highly recommend playing healing orbs if you end up getting some sort of an Ionia start, because healing orbs Irelia is fucking nutty. And what you can do is that you can actually solo frontline her, and you can play something like this, focus everything in the backline, and everything just kills the opposing units. And it is actually just so insane how, this is a clip from my own stream here, where you can see where this Irelia with healing orb just never dies. Especially with gargoyles, she literally cannot die. There's just too much damage on the board, and she just keeps auto healing. It is so insane in terms of tech. I highly recommend playing it. I don't know why this play icon is stuck there, but it just is. Anyways, really good stuff. And I will also mention this though, this board has a low cap. This is very important. This is not talked about enough. This board has a very low cap. And what do I mean by that? Low capped boards means that you are playing boards that the unit quality is just not very high, right? Like we talked about before, again, the Ionia Spat on the Kaisa here, yada, Archangels, maybe even whatever, it doesn't matter. The cap is low. You're playing an Aurelia 2 on your endgame board, a Warwick 2, a Shen 2, right? A Karma 2. Karma 2, I mean, it's alright. When you go level 8, you end up taking into a Bastion, maybe something like Cassante even, right? But, or actually, it's probably Taric, and then you switch off of one of these, and you play into, I don't know, fucking, like, Ari at a certain point, right? Flex it. Flex your options. But what I'm saying is this. If your endgame board contains a lot of 2 costs and 1 cost, you definitely have ways to optimize your board, right? And with 6 Ionia, I notice a lot of people, they'll come to my stream to go, hey, 6 Ionia for Challenger. It always seems to get me a top 4, but I can't seem to win out the game. That's because this board, again, the unit quality is low. If you want to cap out with this board, you need to tech out of Ionia. This is a really important fundamental to have, where at a certain point, if your vertical is not providing you enough value, you can start teching out of it to play higher quality units, which will instead impact your board harder, right? So as we can see here, with 6 Ionia, we have units like the Yasuo, the Set, the Shen, the Aurelia, and the Karma that we can decide to take out of. And if you think about it, even the Warwick. So what we can do instead to cap out our board here is to drop, and then drop even Karma as well. Start playing higher quality units, right? Things like Rise. Things like, let's see, what else do we have at our disposal here, right? Things like, look at the 5 costs here, things like Heimerdinger. Things like Ascena, right? Even things like, would you rather play 6 Ionia, or would you rather play a board like this? This is fucking nuts. Like, this board is so strong. Maybe you don't, this is a little overkill, though. Maybe you play, instead of Senna, you play something like Sejuani. Let's be kind of realistic here, right? Much stronger board. Much stronger board to be playing this rather than the other one that I just showed you, okay? Knowing how to cap out your board is very important. If you hit that 6 Ionia, think, okay, everything's 2-starred. Where do we go from here? That's an important skill to have, and that's something that I really want to touch upon. Next, let's talk about Reroll Noxus, and you'll notice there's a lot of tabs on this one. Reroll Noxus is interesting. It's interesting. It is strong. For sure, it's strong, but you need the opener for it. And there's actually a lot of variations of Reroll Noxus, and that is where it gets tricky. This is sort of the 4 Juggernaut, sort of the standard that was Reroll Noxus during the PvE, but it's all right. It's all right. You can actually still play this board in the current set, in the current patch, and like you'll do great. If you hit everything, you'll do really great, actually. But people have sort of figured out that 6 Noxus is actually sort of better than getting the extra damage reduction, because you get to drop the Set and the Nasus, who, these guys are not doing anything. They're jerking off on the corner here. You can drop Bees and you can just play something else. And 6 Noxus, and you might have realized, much stronger. This is actually the Azir variation, where you have the Noxus emblem. By the way, if you're like, hey, who holds the Noxus emblem, it's probably going to be an Azir, who is one of the best Noxus emblem holders in the current game. Why is this good? It's good because Cassiopeia sort of shares traits between Noxus and Shurima. This way, you're able to play into 3 Shurima, so you still get that Ascendant bonus, and Azir gets a lot of damage from the stats that 6 Noxus provides. On top of that, you do end up playing the Nasus here. I know I said he was jerking off later, but he's come back. He's finished, and that's disgusting. And we have this Swain as your main tank, the Darius and Katarina here. You have a lot of really good potential carries. You can flex off whatever you hit. Really good stuff here. 6 Noxus, though, again, this is the high-capped version of this board. This is if you're managed to go level 8 after 3-starring everything, and you're able to play into the Scion and into the Aatrox. It's a bit dicey whenever you're playing around sort of without the spat, because you're not really likely to hit these units, so you end up actually playing into like this juggernaut variation earlier that we showed you earlier, where the jerk offs fucking Uno dos, thank you. Like you play off this version, right, and then you play eventually into this version, ideally to cap out. Really, really solid stuff. I will say this though, like I said before with the Azir, if we look at the stats, average is a 4.01. Good stuff. Very, very high average. And if you actually hit the Darius 3, the Katarina 3, you're seeing like very high deltas. Negative 1.82, negative 1.66, averaging a 3, averaging a 2.9, right? Really good stuff. Swaying 3-star, 3.49. Still very, very, very high within the stats. Also, as we talked about before, the openings, this is a little, again, kind of nuanced because you could have a standard just Nox opener. You could have something like this. But, like we talked about with the Ionia opener, you actually have a different opening that is stronger, which is with 3 Ionia, and you play into the Darius. Obviously, if you have this opener instead, you are 2 out of 3 Noxes. You're not stacking up the Noxes early game, but you're preserving your HP. You'll get the Noxus stacks eventually. And this actually gets to flex in between both playing Ionia that we talked about earlier with the vertical, but also potentially playing into the Darius carry, right? This is assuming that you don't find the Warwick, but you find a Darius instead. Totally fine. Like, this is the Ionia Ionia start. It's just slightly different, again, with the Samira here. Nonetheless, still great. You check this out for Deadeye, right? But you get the idea. Really, really strong openers. Really easy to play into the line. And Noxus Reroll. Definitely don't sleep on it. Really strong stuff. I don't think I would take Noxus Crest at 2-1, though. It's iffy. It's iffy to say. All right, moving on. A little more spicy tech. Azir Lux. Not talked about enough. This board is very strong. Very, very strong. It is super slept on. Actually, let's go into the stats here, okay? If we go into the stats, go into Explore, and we actually look up, right, again, Diamond Plus, and we see into the filters here, we see Azir into a Lux as well, right? And again, let's look at the 2-star, because again, if you're playing this board, and we're assuming that you're hitting your 2-stars, I mean, already you're looking at a 4.4. It's already, like, pretty decently strong. 2-star, both of these are 3.95. 3.95, which is fucking nutty. It is actually insane how strong this board is. And if we look at this board and we look at Static Shiv in particular, and the user is on Lux, we are, I guess it's better on Azir, but you can actually throw this on Lux and it's totally fine. The average is slightly worse. But let's talk about the technology behind this Shiv Lux and why it can be good or why it can be bad. So, for those of you who don't know, this board, oh, by the way, the level 7 version, just because I know somebody's going to ask, you just dropped Teemo. Okay, level 7 version, and then Teemo at level 8. A little awkward to throw in a 2 cost at level 8, but nonetheless, still very strong. Why would you sometimes want to put Shiv on Lux instead of the Azir? Right, Shiv Lux sounds redundant. And it sounds redundant because within her ability, if my mouse will cooperate, you can see that if you read into it, she reduces the MR of her target every second by X amount. It's usually by 15 unless you 3-star her. But if you 3-star a Lux, like, the game's over. Right? She has MR Shred already built into her kit. So why would you ever Shiv Lux? The idea is, when you position these two units, you need to keep them adjacent to each other. Why is this positioning so important, right? Let's look at a full board. For example, let's say your opponent is playing something along the lines of, let's say they are playing, let's say they're playing Freljord. That's the easiest one to think about. Freljord, right? They're doing something like this, something like this, something like, I don't know, fucking, something like this, something like, whatever. You get the idea, right? Something along these lines. There's probably a Aphelios somewhere in the back, right? That's not important. Let's just focus on the front line here. When you put these two adjacent to each other, they will target the same unit. This is really important. With Lux, she will cast her ability on the main tank here, completely shredding their MR. Huge, huge stuff. And actually, I have Archangels here, but technically Blue Buff is actually even better on her, because she's able to insta-cast and just immediately start casting on the opponents and just start shredding like crazy. Now, why would you want Static Shiv, though? Static Shiv is because if you don't manage to find that Blue Buff, Static Shiv, she gets to immediately already start targeting the MR, lowering it down, and then you, on top of that, get to put this laser beam onto the tank. They melt immediately. Now, again, you might be going, well, why don't I just shiv the Azir? He just shivs his target. It's fine. He'll shift for himself. This opens up a third item for Azir. This is basically like playing 4-item Azir. So you end up actually getting to play something like a Hodge, like a healing item, or something like Archangels. Well, Archangels is probably not the best in this scenario. It's probably more something like Rabadons, or actually even JG, right? Stuff like these. You have a lot of different options here, and being able to tech into like healing, I think Hodge is probably best in this scenario, by the way. But being able to tech into a little bit of healing here as well, this is super, super strong. Again, you get to melt down everybody. And actually, fun fact, you can even do something like this with the Sniper's Focus. That's not Sniper's Focus. Here we go. Sniper's Focus here. This is gonna fucking destroy everything. Everything. So, don't sleep on this tech. Really, really strong stuff. The early game, though, I will say this, though. The early game is usually a Cassiopeia opener. And this, in my opinion, is also one of the strongest early game boards in the current set. It's really nice because with Cassiopeia in particular, you get to play at level 5 a Teemo. A Teemo. And why is Teemo so important here? This is really, really crazy because Teemo, his ability Wounds, applies Merle across the whole board. Why does that matter? Cassiopeia's ability will do bonus damage if the target is already wounded. And her ability also wounds the targets. So if you do an AoE wound on top of early game Cassiopeia 2 damage, plus the bonus damage on top of that, everything dies. This is one of the strongest, and I would actually argue maybe stronger than the Ionia level 5 board that we talked about earlier. Obviously, the cap is different. You're playing Azir Lux instead of into the Yasuo Kaisa or whatever, but nonetheless, still really, really solid board. I highly, highly recommend looking more into the Shreemo line because I think people are still sleeping on Azir. They don't understand how Azir works, and he works because of Lux. Lux enables him to go crazy. Lux, Azir solo carry, I will say this though, Azir solo carry is not that strong, but again, with Lux, enables him very, very heavily. Finally, let's talk about the strongest board and one of the more nuanced boards of this patch in my opinion, and that is Reroll Sona. Now, you might be going, multicast Reroll, everybody knows about this already, right? It's not that strong. I've played it before, but like it didn't feel that good. It didn't feel that good because this board is very nuanced. And if you understand the nuances and the reason why people end up going 8th playing this board, you will understand that this board is actually insane. It's absolutely insane, and in my opinion, it has the highest cap in terms of power, and it has multiple times, from my experience, beaten maxed Piltover cash out Zeri boards. Like, I'm talking like 50, 60 stack T-hexes. Like, this board will clean that board. Why does it do that? 2 reasons. 1, backline access. Backline access, Sona Vel'koz starts exploding everything. It just hits everybody with the Sorcerer's buff. It's a GG. It's a GG. Also, Sona will just snipe the Zeri and just basically 2-shot her. It's nuts. She just sent the first beam, 10 HP. Second beam, boom, dead. Really easy stuff. On top of this, I will say this though. People go 8th playing this board a lot. Why is that the case? Let's talk about it. And again, let me just prove it to you real quick, by the way, with like my own match history. Sona 3 first, right here, right? Sona 3 is the first here. Is this the first page? Yeah. Sona 3 is the first. Whenever I get to play this board, it's just a fucking first. Scroll down a little bit here to first. Kaisa 3, Aphelios 3. Sorry, a lot of 4-star 3 costs, right? It's just stupid. Again, Sona Reroll is a first. Sona Reroll here, it's a third, right? And you might notice in some games it's like a 5th, but I mean, I low rolled and I played pretty poorly in a lot of these games. I don't want to talk about it, but nonetheless, it's still very, very strong. I promise you it's strong. And let's talk about the nuances and why those games that when I went bot 4 with, I didn't play into the nuance and I was low-key hard forcing this board. First, this board, you cannot hard force it. People hate this board because the early game sucks. It is terrible. And just to give you an idea of what I mean by the early game is terrible, if you were to play this board in the early game, all right, let's look into multicasters, and you have a board that looks something like this, and some sort of a front line, which is, I don't know, you're flexing your front line, so maybe something like this in the early game, right? Or maybe you even drop this, you play something like Void, right? If you have something like this, and Void, right? You have something like this, right? You have a board like this, and let's say you have a 2-star cast, 2-star Malzahar. This board sucks. It looks strong. Don't get me wrong, it looks strong. This board fucking sucks. This board sucks because you're carrying a Sona 1. Sona 1 with 2 multicaster. Dog shit unit. And in fact, even a 2-star Sona with 2 multicaster is a dog shit unit. This does not win you fights. And surprisingly enough, it took me like 10 games of Sona Reroll to figure this out. This is not how you play Sona Reroll in the early game. In the early game, you play around your Malzahar instead, and then you eventually take into the Taric here. Do you see where I'm going with this? The Sorcerers with the Swain, and then eventually you will find yourself going to level 6, and you want to maybe play a multicast, or you play the Teemo for the strategist as well. Do you see how this eventually pivots out? You eventually pivot out of Void, and you end up playing something along the lines at level 7 of this board here. And then just with a little bit of finesse, we are now looking at our board with something like this, right? And now we're here. You need to finesse the early game with this board, because even if you manage to get to this board here, which is the exact same board as here, exactly the same, but even if you manage to get here, if you don't 2-star all of these, and maybe a little bit of your front line, something like this, if this is not your board at 4-1, you're going to lose fights. Once all of these are 2-starred, except for maybe Jarvan, that's a little overkill at level 7, right? But if you 2-star everything in the backline here, 2-star these, your stage 4 and most of stage 5 is pretty solid. It's pretty solid, and you will actually win most fights. Sona 2, like we said before, with 2 multicaster, dog shit. You need 4. There's a reason why multicaster is not an emblem, by the way, because if it was, it would be impossible to balance. You need 4, because Sona with just 2 is not enabling her to her full potential, not even close. And then once you have this sort of a scenario, then you can start slamming the Shojin, the Gunblade, get the 3rd Demacia item onto her. Much better spot. Your level 4, your level 7, your 4-1 roll down should look like this. No exceptions. Maybe if you have everything 2-star and you have really low econ, maybe, or really high econ rather, it would be the opposite. Maybe you can have like maybe a 1-star Sona here and everything else 2-star. Maybe fine. But you really do want the 2-stars here. And actually don't sleep on Vel'koz, because if you have the 1-star and you have way more Vel'koz than the Sonas, just carry Vel'koz. Totally fine. Obviously Vel'koz does prefer blue buff over Shojin, but nonetheless still solid. Now, once you have finally enabled yourself to hit this part of the game, you are going to have a good time. You're going to have a good time. It is insane how strong this board gets. You reroll at 7, slow roll it, try to hit everything, and then you win out. I will say this though. Stats-wise, 3-star Sona, 2-star Vel'koz is averaging a 3.54. Nuts. You manage to 3-star both of them. 2.37. 2.37 and a almost 40% win rate. This is the strongest board of the patch. If you don't believe me, test it for yourself and make sure that you practice the early game. I will say this, like I do want to mention this, by the way. Don't get baited by Cruel Pact. Sucks dick. You lose too much HP from Cruel Pact hitting 7 early, and like we said before, this board is nuanced. Because if you don't have everything 2-starred here, on your level 7 board, you're going to lose fights. And so Cruel Pact is not the way to go here. And in fact, you should always, if you hit March of Progress, force Sona Reroll. Play your early game however you like. You go level 7 basically for free at 3-6. And then, with the econ that you generated, and with a little bit of finesse, you'll be able to play this Sona Reroll very easily, and your level 7 should be chillin'. Sorry, I don't know who that is. Anyways, that's basically it for this video. Again, I do expect a lot more people to be playing this board. It's really disgusting. And I hope you guys learned something. Take care, and happy climbing.